What really happened to wrestling's 8-foot giant Jorge González? A guy who was drafted by the Atlanta Hawks in 1988 and later faced The Undertaker at WrestleMania IX. His medical condition made him different from day one, his basketball dreams got crushed, and his wrestling career had the highest highs and lowest lows you can imagine. By the end of this video, you'll understand why his story is one of the most tragic in wrestling history. But to understand how Jorge became wrestling's most controversial giant, we need to start at the very beginning. It's January 31st, 1966 in El Colorado, Formosa, Argentina, and a baby is born who will literally outgrow everyone around him. Jorge González enters the world looking like any other newborn, but hidden inside his tiny body is a condition that will define every single day of his existence. We're talking about gigantism, a rare disorder caused by his pituitary gland overproducing growth hormone. Jorge's teenage years bring growth that defies normal human development. Most kids worry about acne or getting a date to prom. Jorge's dealing with something completely different, a body that won't stop growing at rates that make doctors scratch their heads. By his mid-teens, Jorge had already topped 7 feet. His social world shrinks as peers struggle to relate to someone whose physical presence dominates every room he enters. And by his late teens, Jorge realizes his extraordinary height might be both his biggest advantage and his greatest burden. The basketball courts of Argentina become his testing ground. Could basketball turn the giant's difference into an advantage? Jorge's basketball journey starts with all the promise in the world, but ends in crushing disappointment. By early adulthood, his true height was recorded at about 7 feet 7 inches. And the Argentine basketball world takes notice. Logic says if you're nearly 8 feet tall, you should dominate every court you step on. He helped Gimnasia y Esgrima La Plata earn promotion to Argentina's first division and played for Argentina's national team in international tournaments in the mid-1980s, which is where NBA scouts first noticed him. Suddenly, everyone's talking about this giant from Formosa. Scouts and coaches see his height and start imagining what he could do in professional basketball. Here's a guy who can reach the rim without jumping, who can see over every defense, who makes other tall players look short. He was selected in the 1988 NBA draft, 54th pick in the 3rd round by the Atlanta Hawks, making him the tallest player ever drafted in NBA history. Think about that for a second. The NBA, home to the world's best basketball players, looks at Jorge and decides he's worth taking a chance on. His height alone gets him drafted ahead of hundreds of other players who've spent their whole lives perfecting their basketball skills. But here's the cruel reality check that nobody wants to talk about. Being incredibly tall and being good at basketball are two completely different things. Jorge's height makes him look like he should be unstoppable, but basketball requires way more than just being tall. You need quick feet, good hands, stamina, and coordination that works at game speed. His coordination can't match his height. His mobility is limited. Professional basketball demands skills that gigantism actually works against. While other players move like athletes, Jorge moves like someone fighting against his own body. The same condition that made him attractive to scouts is the same condition that makes it almost impossible for him to succeed at the highest level. Then a serious knee injury and trouble adapting to the physical demands ended his basketball prospects. His knees, already under tremendous stress from supporting his massive frame, can't handle the demands of professional basketball. The injury isn't just bad luck, it's the inevitable result of asking a body affected by gigantism to perform at elite athletic levels. The dream that seemed so obvious, use your height to dominate basketball, crumbles when his body can't handle the demands of elite competition. All those scouts and coaches who saw dollar signs when they looked at Jorge's height forgot about the medical reality of his condition. Being tall doesn't mean being athletic when your height comes from a hormone disorder. Jorge learns the hard lesson that physical advantages mean nothing if your condition prevents you from using them effectively. Basketball's rejection leaves him at a crossroads, searching for a new direction. But sometimes the most unexpected opportunities come from places you never considered. Ted Turner, who owned the Atlanta Hawks that drafted Jorge, sees something in him that basketball couldn't capitalize on. Pure commercial potential. Turner's got this business empire that includes television networks and wrestling promotions, so his mind works differently than basketball scouts. He's not looking at Jorge and seeing missed free throws or slow footwork. He's seeing television ratings and ticket sales. Turner and WCW saw commercial potential in an actual giant, less about basketball skill, more about drawing curiosity and ratings. While basketball demanded skill and coordination that Jorge's condition made nearly impossible, wrestling promoters are looking for something completely different, a larger-than-life attraction that can fill arenas based on curiosity alone. Wrestling doesn't care if you can run a fast break or hit jump shots. Wrestling cares if people will pay money to see you, and Jorge's got that quality in spades. Turner's business mind kicks in fast. Forget athletic ability, this guy is a walking, talking main event just by stepping through the curtain. Wrestling has always been about bigger-than-life characters, and Jorge represents the ultimate extension of that concept. He's not just big for a wrestler, he's big for a human being. The transition from Argentina to American wrestling circuits represents a complete career reinvention for Jorge at age 24. He's trading the structured world of professional basketball for something that's part sport, part theater, and completely different from anything he's experienced. Wrestling promoters don't care if he can shoot free throws or run plays. They care that he makes every other wrestler look like a child by comparison. The move to America means leaving everything familiar behind and learning an entirely new form of entertainment. Jorge has to figure out how to work with other performers, how to tell stories in the ring, and how to connect with audiences who've never seen anyone remotely close to his size. It's like starting over in a completely different career at an age when most people are hitting their stride. CW sees dollar signs when they look at Jorge. He's the kind of attraction that sells tickets based on curiosity alone before he even learns his first wrestling move. Arena managers know that fans will show up just to see if this giant is real or some kind of wrestling trick. Ted Turner arranged a move to WCW, and after training, he debuted as El Gigante in 1990. He debuted at WCW's Capital Combat pay-per-view on May 19, 1990, billed close to 8 feet tall. The name change represents more than just marketing. It's Jorge embracing a completely new identity built around what makes him unique, rather than what he can't do well. This career pivot proves that sometimes your greatest asset isn't what you're good at. It's what makes you absolutely unique. But turning that uniqueness into wrestling success would require completely rethinking how someone learns the business. Training someone Jorge's size requires completely rewriting wrestling instruction from the ground up. He trained at the WCW power plant for more than a year, a process trainers had to adapt because few programs prepared instructors for someone of his size. Most wrestling schools have systems that work for guys who are 6 feet tall and weigh around 200 pounds. Jorge shows up at nearly 8 feet and over 400 pounds, so instructors realize they're dealing with challenges they've never faced before. Traditional wrestling moves don't work when you're dealing with someone who's nearly 8 feet tall and weighs over 400 pounds. A simple body slam or taking a bump required rewritten technique to avoid catastrophic injury. Hip tosses don't work when your opponent's hips are at your chest level. Even basic grappling positions need to be completely rethought. Here's the big problem. How do you teach someone to take a bump safely when they're so tall that falling down becomes genuinely dangerous? When Jorge falls backward, he's dropping from a much greater height than normal wrestlers. The impact when he hits the mat is massive. His knees and back take punishment that would destroy smaller wrestlers. His mobility limitations mean the typical wrestling moveset is basically useless. Jorge can't do drop kicks or flying moves off the top rope. He can't run the ropes at normal speed. He can't even move around the ring with the agility that most wrestling matches require. Trainers have to create a completely new approach that works with what Jorge can actually do. Safety becomes the biggest concern because when someone Jorge's size gets hurt, the injuries are catastrophic. A torn knee ligament for a normal wrestler means a few months off. For Jorge, with all that weight and height putting stress on his joints, an injury like that could end his career permanently. Creative teams start working backward instead of forward. Usually you teach wrestlers moves first, then build stories around what they can do well. With Jorge, they're building stories around his limitations and finding ways to hide what he can't do. They focus on his intimidating presence rather than athletic ability. Jorge's training period shows how the wrestling business adapts to unique performers by emphasizing presence over technical skill. The trainers realize pretty quickly that Jorge won't succeed by being a great wrestler in the traditional sense. He'll succeed by being something fans have never seen before. By the time he's ready for his debut, everyone understands that El Gigante won't succeed because of what he can do. He'll succeed because of what he represents. His mere existence in a wrestling ring creates drama that no amount of technical skill can match. All that preparation was about to be put to the ultimate test in front of a live wrestling audience. Capital Combat on May 19, 1990, marks the official arrival of El Gigante, and WCW knows they've got something special on their hands. The promotion doesn't mess around with a quiet debut or gradual introduction. They bill him as a face initially and use him against top names to create instant visual contrasts that sell themselves. The question isn't whether he can wrestle well, it's whether the audience will buy into the spectacle of his sheer size. WCW understands that technical ability takes a back seat when you've got a legitimate giant walking to the ring. They're not selling wrestling moves or athletic competition. They're selling the experience of seeing something that shouldn't exist in real life. His arrival forced promoters to think differently about size as spectacle and created booking templates for giant attractions. Before El Gigante, wrestling had big men like Andre the Giant, but Jorge represents something different. He's not just tall for a wrestler, he's tall for a human being. Other promotions start looking at their rosters differently after seeing what WCW accomplishes with Jorge. The crowd reaction is instant and visceral when El Gigante makes his entrance. You can't fake the genuine shock of seeing someone that massive in person. Fans who thought they knew what to expect from wrestling suddenly realize they're witnessing something completely outside normal human experience. The arena goes quiet for a split second before erupting in amazement. El Gigante doesn't need to be technically perfect because his presence alone changes the entire dynamic of any match he's in. When he steps through those ropes, every other wrestler in the ring looks like a child by comparison. The visual impact overwhelms any concerns about move execution or athletic ability. Wrestling fans understand immediately that they're seeing something rare. High-profile feuds with established stars like Ric Flair suddenly make sense because the visual contrast creates instant drama. You don't need complex storylines when you can put the style in and profile in Nature Boy next to an 8-foot giant. The story writes itself just by having them stand in the same ring together. Cross-promotional appearances with New Japan Pro Wrestling show that Jorge's appeal transcends language and cultural barriers. Japanese fans react with the same amazement as American audiences. His impact doesn't depend on understanding English or following complex wrestling narratives. The spectacle speaks for itself regardless of where he appears. His WCW debut proves that sometimes the wrestling business needs attractions that exist outside normal competitive parameters. Wrestling works best when it combines athletic competition with larger-than-life characters, and Jorge represents the ultimate extension of that concept. El Gigante becomes living proof that in wrestling, being unforgettable matters more than being technically proficient. His debut establishes a template that wrestling promotions still reference today when they're looking for unique attractions. But having a memorable debut is just the first step. Now he needs to prove he can work with wrestling's biggest names. Working with wrestling's biggest names requires a completely different approach when you're El Gigante. Jorge's early WCW storylines pit him against top stars like Ric Flair, creating compelling visual narratives that write themselves. His feud with Ric Flair for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship makes perfect sense from a storytelling perspective. Putting Flair, a legend known for charisma and style, opposite a silent 8-foot presence created its own story. Creative teams discover that building stories around Jorge means emphasizing the David versus Goliath dynamic, except he's always Goliath. Every opponent becomes David by default, no matter how big or tough they normally appear. Wrestlers who usually intimidate other performers suddenly look like regular guys when they're standing across from El Gigante. His feuds with Sid Vicious and One Man Gang become perfect examples of the Who's the Real Giant storyline that wrestling fans eat up. These early angles rely heavily on Jorge's imposing presence rather than complex storytelling or technical wrestling exhibitions. WCW knows they don't need to create intricate plots when they've got a legitimate giant on their roster. The story becomes about whether anyone can figure out how to deal with someone that size. Every match feels like an experiment to see what works against El Gigante. His participation in the 1991 Chamber of Horrors match and other specialty stipulations become perfect vehicles for showcasing his intimidating frame without exposing his limitations. These gimmick matches focus on atmosphere and spectacle rather than technical wrestling ability. Jorge fits perfectly into these scenarios because they emphasize his physical presence over his move execution. The matches become about survival and intimidation rather than athletic competition. Television segments and media appearances maximize the spectacle factor, treating El Gigante as a legitimate attraction beyond just wrestling. WCW uses cross-promotional appearances with New Japan Pro Wrestling to show his international draw, proving his appeal wasn't limited to American audiences. These appearances help establish Jorge as something special that exists outside normal wrestling parameters. People tune in just to see if this giant is real or some kind of camera trick. The feuds work because they lean into what makes Jorge special rather than trying to make him something he's not. WCW doesn't pretend he's a technical master or try to hide his limitations. They build everything around his extraordinary size and let that quality drive the storytelling. His early WCW storylines established the template for how wrestling can successfully book giant performers as marquee attractions. These first feuds prove that compelling wrestling stories don't always need athletic excellence. Sometimes they just need genuine uniqueness. But establishing yourself with memorable feuds is just the foundation. The real test comes when everything needs to come together at the highest level. Jorge's career reaches its creative and commercial sweet spot during his WCW peak years. This isn't just about one match or one storyline, it's about a period where everything WCW tried with El Gigante actually worked the way they hoped it would. At his peak, he earned mainstream recognition. Pro Wrestling Illustrated put him at number 112 in the PWI 500 in 1991, showing his visibility within the wrestling industry. WCW starts building entire television episodes around his appearances. When El Gigante shows up on Saturday Night or Worldwide Wrestling, his segments create buzz that extends beyond regular wrestling programming. Arena attendance increases for live events when his name appears on promotional materials. The business side of wrestling responds exactly the way WCW executives hoped when they first signed him. While his technical skills remain limited, there are magical moments where storytelling, crowd reaction, and pure presence create something special. Jorge finds his rhythm working with opponents who understand how to structure matches around his strengths. These aren't technical masterpieces, but they're compelling television that keeps audiences engaged from start to finish. This period demonstrates wrestling's unique ability to turn physical limitations into storytelling advantages when everything aligns correctly. Instead of hiding what Jorge can't do, WCW builds entire narratives around his imposing presence. His limitations become part of the story rather than obstacles to overcome. Opponents have to find creative ways to deal with someone they can't overpower or intimidate through normal means. His most memorable matches aren't remembered for athletic excellence. They're remembered for the aura and atmosphere he created. Fans talk about the feeling of watching El Gigante more than specific moves or sequences. The matches work because they create an experience that's different from regular wrestling. People remember how it felt to watch something they'd never seen before. The combination of dramatic presentation and audience investment temporarily compensates for any deficiencies in traditional wrestling ability. WCW surrounds Jorge with the right managers, opponents, and storylines that maximize his impact. The presentation makes his presence feel important and special, rather than awkward or forced. His best stretches came when creative leaned into spectacle and matched him with opponents who could structure a safe, dramatic match around him. Live audiences react with genuine amazement that creates an electric atmosphere impossible to replicate with smaller performers. Arena crowds buzz with excitement before Jorge even appears. The anticipation builds throughout the show until his music hits and the crowd erupts. Jorge's peak period shows how wrestling's blend of sport and entertainment can elevate unique performers beyond their apparent limitations. This era cements his place as one of wrestling's most enduringly discussed giant characters, proving that presence can be more valuable than technique. But success in one company doesn't guarantee the same treatment elsewhere, and Jorge's next career move would prove that different promotions have very different ideas about how to present the same performer. Jorge joins the WWE in late 1992 and gets repackaged as Giant Gonzalez in early 1993. But this transition comes with some of wrestling's most controversial creative decisions. The WWE takes one look at Jorge and decides they can make him even more spectacular than WCW ever did. Their solution involves one of the most bizarre costume choices in wrestling history. The WWE places him in a full-body suit with airbrushed muscles and attached hair to exaggerate his look, a choice that drew heavy criticism and became one of the most talked-about visual elements of his WWE run. This isn't just a regular wrestling outfit. We're talking about a skin-tight bodysuit that covers Jorge from head to toe, painted with fake muscles and body hair that makes him look like some kind of prehistoric monster. The suit adds bulk to his already massive frame and creates this uncanny valley effect that's both fascinating and disturbing. His WWE surprise debut at the Royal Rumble on January 24, 1993, saw him eliminate The Undertaker from the Rumble despite not being an official participant, immediately establishing Giant Gonzalez as a major threat. Wrestling fans take one look at Giant Gonzalez in that bodysuit and immediately know they're seeing something that will be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The costume is so outrageous that it overshadows everything else about his character. People stop focusing on his impressive height and start focusing on how ridiculous he looks. Harvey Whippleman becomes his manager, establishing a dynamic that frames Gonzalez as a managed monster rather than an autonomous competitor. In WWE, the character dynamic emphasized Whippleman speaking, while Gonzalez was the physical presence. This setup makes Gonzalez feel less like a wrestler and more like a special attraction that needs a handler to function properly. The WWE creative approach leans heavily into controversial, larger-than-life storytelling that emphasizes his uncanny appearance over everything else. They're not interested in the respectful presentation that WCW used with El Gigante. The WWE wants shock value and spectacle that gets people talking, even if that talk isn't always positive. The bodysuit decision shows how wrestling promotions sometimes make creative choices that prioritize shock value over performer dignity. Jorge goes from being an impressive giant to being a costume-wearing attraction. The WWE sacrifices his credibility for the sake of creating something visually striking that will grab television viewers' attention. His WWE tenure becomes highly visible, but for reasons that aren't always flattering to his wrestling legacy. More people see Giant Gonzalez than ever saw El Gigante, but they remember him as the guy in the ridiculous bodysuit rather than an intimidating giant. The repackaging demonstrates how different wrestling companies can take the same performer and create completely different presentations. Jorge the person remains the same, but Giant Gonzalez feels like a completely different character from El Gigante. This transformation sets up his biggest opportunity yet, a showcase on wrestling's grandest stage. WrestleMania IX on April 4, 1993 at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas represents the pinnacle of Jorge's wrestling career in terms of exposure and audience reach. WrestleMania is wrestling's Super Bowl, the one event that casual fans tune in to watch, and Jorge finds himself in a prominent position on the card facing The Undertaker. His feud with The Undertaker culminates at WrestleMania, giving Jorge exposure on wrestling's biggest annual event. The build-up makes sense from a storytelling perspective. You've got The Undertaker, this supernatural character who's undefeated at WrestleMania, facing off against Giant Gonzalez, who's bigger than anyone Undertaker has ever encountered. The visual contrast writes the story by itself. Here's the dead man who intimidates everyone else, meeting someone who actually makes him look small. The match becomes infamous not for athletic excellence, but for one of the most bizarre finishes in WrestleMania history. Wrestling fans expect certain things from their big events: clean finishes, memorable moments, matches that make sense within the context of the show. What they get instead is something that defies every expectation about how a WrestleMania match should end. Giant Gonzalez incapacitates The Undertaker with a chloroform-soaked rag, creating a finish that was widely criticized for being awkward and unsatisfying. Think about how ridiculous this sounds. In the middle of a wrestling match, Jorge's manager Harvey Whippleman hands him a rag soaked in chloroform, and Jorge uses it to knock out The Undertaker. This isn't a wrestling move or even a typical foreign object. It's something you'd expect to see in a bad movie about kidnappers, not on wrestling's biggest stage. The spot ended in a disqualification win for The Undertaker, marking one of the rare non-decisive WrestleMania outcomes for him. The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak continues, but not in the dominant fashion that fans expect from the dead man. Instead of a decisive victory that adds to his legend, Undertaker wins by disqualification because his opponent used chloroform. The finish makes nobody look good and exposed how difficult it could be to craft a decent match around Gonzalez's limits. The match and its finish quickly became a focal point for criticism of Gonzalez's booking and in-ring limitations. The Undertaker himself would later criticize working with Gonzalez, which established context for why this match haunted Jorge's legacy. Decades later, wrestling fans still bring up this match as an example of WrestleMania moments that didn't work. It's remembered alongside other notorious WrestleMania disasters, the kind of moments that make fans cringe rather than cheer. This WrestleMania moment perfectly captures both the potential and the problems of booking Jorge in high-profile situations. The match shows how Jorge's presence can create unique moments and visual drama that nobody else can provide. But it also demonstrates the growing challenges of creating satisfying conclusions when physical limitations start affecting match quality. WrestleMania IX gives Jorge his greatest exposure, while simultaneously creating one of his most criticized performances. What fans didn't realize at the time was that behind the spectacle, Jorge was beginning to face much more serious challenges than just bad booking decisions. Jorge's gigantism and subsequent complications, including diabetes, progressively limited his mobility and stamina as the condition continued taking its toll. Most people think being a giant means you're just really big and that's it. But gigantism is actually a medical disorder that keeps attacking your body every single day. The excess growth hormone doesn't just make you taller, it damages your organs, your joints, and basically everything inside your body. As the years pass, Jorge's mobility deteriorates significantly, and his wrestling performance declines along with his health. Walking becomes harder, moving around the ring takes more effort. Simple things like getting in and out of cars turn into major challenges. His knees and hips take a beating from carrying all that weight, and the constant stress on his joints creates chronic pain that never goes away. Diabetes and related complications place an enormous burden on his daily life, making even basic activities increasingly difficult. Gigantism often leads to diabetes because all that excess growth hormone messes with your blood sugar levels. Jorge has to deal with insulin shots, blood sugar monitoring, and all the side effects that come with diabetes. His energy levels drop, his vision gets affected, wounds heal slower. Everything becomes harder when your body is fighting multiple medical conditions at once. The physically demanding nature of wrestling accelerates the toll that gigantism takes on his body, creating a vicious cycle of decline. Wrestling is tough on healthy bodies, but Jorge's body isn't healthy. Every bump he takes hits harder. Every match leaves him more exhausted. The constant travel and physical stress make his medical problems worse, which makes wrestling even more difficult. WCW's plans to use him as the Yeti in 1995 were scrapped after a diabetes-related medical issue during preparations, showing how his health directly interrupted career opportunities. This incident perfectly illustrates how Jorge's medical condition starts affecting his professional reliability. Promotions can't count on him to show up and perform when his health becomes unpredictable. Industry observers and former colleagues notice that his condition affects his ability to contribute consistently in wrestling matches. Jorge moves slower in the ring. He can't perform the same moves he used to do. Matches have to be structured differently to hide his declining mobility. Other wrestlers start having to carry more of the workload when they're in the ring with him. His medical needs intensify while his drawing power decreases, creating business complications for any promotion wanting to use him. Wrestling promotions have to weigh the costs of dealing with Jorge's health issues against the money he brings in. His medical expenses go up while his ability to draw crowds goes down. It's a business problem that gets worse every year. He retired in January 1996 due to serious health issues, then returned to Argentina. The reality of gigantism becomes impossible to ignore. This condition that made him famous is also slowly destroying his quality of life. Wrestling's physical demands prove incompatible with a body that's already struggling under the burden of excessive growth hormone. The contrast between his public spectacle and private suffering becomes the central tragedy of his later career, setting up even harsher realities ahead. Wrestling promotions start losing interest in booking Jorge as his health problems make him increasingly unreliable. The business runs on one simple rule: you're only as good as your last match. When Jorge's mobility issues start affecting match quality, promoters who once saw dollar signs now see liability concerns and disappointing performances. His WWE contract expired on October 7, 1993, marking the beginning of a steady decline in major bookings. The quality and frequency of his matches decrease rapidly as bookers realize his limitations now outweigh his drawing power. Promotions that used to build entire television episodes around Jorge's appearances start looking for other attractions. His match quality drops to levels that hurt shows rather than helping them. Tours in New Japan Pro Wrestling and WR during 1994 to 1995 represent his final attempts to maintain relevance in major wrestling. These bookings become increasingly sporadic and less prominent. His last singles match came on February 8, 1995 against the Great Muta, followed by a final match on December 8, 1995. Jorge goes from main event attraction to occasional special appearance, then to barely being used at all. The Undertaker's later criticism highlights how difficult it became to create quality matches with Jorge. Undertaker said working with Gonzalez took years off my career and criticized his in-ring ability. These comments from respected veterans damage Jorge's reputation further and make promoters even more reluctant to book him. When established stars publicly criticize working with someone, it creates a reputation problem that's almost impossible to overcome. Professional relationships that once seemed solid begin to fray as the business shifts away from aging giants who can't perform reliably. Wrestling is ultimately about making money, and when Jorge stops being profitable, longtime supporters start distancing themselves. Harvey Whippleman's role as his advocate diminishes as even longtime supporters can't justify continued prominent bookings. The industry's waning interest is particularly harsh because it's based on factors completely beyond Jorge's control, his deteriorating medical condition. Promoters weigh medical liabilities and inconsistent performances versus box office draw, and the math stops working in Jorge's favor. Wrestling's business nature means personal circumstances don't matter when you can't perform at acceptable levels. Jorge retires in January 1996. His gradual exit from major wrestling showing how the business prioritizes current ability over past contributions. The wrestling world moves on without him, leaving Jorge to face an uncertain future outside the only career that ever made sense for someone his size. What comes next proves even more challenging than losing his wrestling career. Jorge's post-wrestling life reveals the full human cost of a career built around a medical condition that never stops progressing. After retiring from wrestling in 1996, Jorge returns to Argentina to live on a ranch, relying on support from friends, family, and former colleagues. The transition from international wrestling star to quiet ranch life represents more than just a career change. It's Jorge accepting that his body can no longer handle the demands that made him famous. His health continues to deteriorate dramatically over the following years. By October 2009, he requires a wheelchair and needs dialysis due to kidney failure caused by diabetes complications. The same gigantism that made him a wrestling attraction now confines him to medical treatments and mobility aids. His kidneys, damaged by years of diabetes brought on by his hormone disorder, can no longer function without mechanical assistance. The dialysis treatments become a regular part of his life, draining his energy and limiting his activities. Harvey Whippleman reportedly sent money to support Gonzalez and his family, and the Argentine Basketball Federation provided donations for household items and medicines as Jorge's medical needs become overwhelming. Wrestling careers don't come with comprehensive health insurance or pension plans, especially for performers whose careers ended in the mid-1990s. The mounting medical bills for dialysis, diabetes treatment, and mobility assistance create financial pressures that Jorge can't handle on his own. These support networks become his lifeline during his final years. The contrast between his former life as a wrestling attraction and his final years struggling with basic mobility is heartbreaking. Jorge once filled arenas with fans amazed by his extraordinary presence. Now he struggles with tasks that healthy people take for granted. Getting around his own home becomes difficult. Simple activities like eating meals or watching television require assistance from caregivers. His story becomes a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature of fame in wrestling and the long-term consequences of gigantism. Wrestling provides brief moments of glory and financial success, but the physical toll accumulates over decades. Jorge's medical condition, which created his career opportunities, ultimately destroys his quality of life after wrestling ends. Financial struggles compound his health problems, showing how wrestling careers don't always provide long-term security for performers. On September 22, 2010, Jorge passes away in San Martin, Argentina, from complications related to diabetes and heart issues at age 44. His death ends a life defined by extraordinary physical presence and the medical condition that both made him famous and caused his decline. The heart problems that claim his life stem directly from the same gigantism that brought him wrestling success. Jorge González leaves behind a complex legacy as wrestling's tallest competitor and a reminder that the human stories behind larger-than-life characters are often more complicated than fans realize. Jorge González's story shows what happens when a rare medical condition collides with the entertainment business and human ambition. His gigantism created opportunities that most people never get, but it also destroyed his body in ways that fans never understood while watching him perform. His wrestling career earned mixed reviews. The Wrestling Observer named his 1993 feud with The Undertaker worst feud of the year. But he remains the tallest wrestler to compete for WCW and WWE, and one of the tallest Argentine athletes in history. That unique place in wrestling can't be taken away regardless of match quality or booking decisions. His story reminds us that behind every spectacle, there's a person with real struggles. Jorge's legacy goes beyond wrestling moves or storylines. It's about the human cost of being different in an industry built around larger-than-life characters. If you remember seeing El Gigante or Giant Gonzalez, leave your take in the comments. What moment sticks with you? Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.